Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Corwin Monday afternoon webinar series, your no-cost platform for superior professional learning. Today's webinar is Using Dialogue to Develop a Language of Learning, presented by James Nottingham and Martin Renton. So welcome, everyone. So now what I'd like to do is turn the meeting over to Ariel Curry, Acquisitions Editor for Corwin, to introduce our presenters.
Thanks, Jeff. So I am the editor of James and Martin's books, and it is really a pleasure working with them. James is the founder of Challenging Learning, an international company, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about what they do and what their mission is. But James is a past school teacher and leader, and he is now a regular keynoter alongside folks that you might have heard of, like John Hattie and Carol Dweck. Martin Renton is the managing director of Challenging Learning, and he also comes to us with a breadth of experience in schools as both a teacher and a leader. Together, the two of them are the co-authors of Challenging Learning Through Dialogue. This book is part of the Challenging Learning series through Corwin, and it's the foundation of today's webinar. I actually had the opportunity to visit the Challenging Learning team in the UK over the summer, and I attended one of the mindset conferences with Carol Dweck in Sweden, so I can personally attest to the power of what they're about to share. James is going to be starting us off, so I'll pass it over to you, James.
Thank you, Ariel, and lovely to be with everybody again. Good afternoon to you all, good evening, or wherever you are. It's lovely to be back with you. Back in June, I shared some of the key points about the learning challenge and how to guide students through the learning pit. This time, we're going to be talking about dialogue, and I'm delighted to say that one of the two co-authors on the book is with me, Martin Renton, and he's going to be talking through most of what we are going to say tonight. Martin has a huge amount of experience in dialogue. In fact, he comes from Berwick-upon-Tweed, which some of you might know. It's one of the border towns between England and Scotland. And that town has changed hands 13 times in its history between England and Scotland. Its football team, that's the soccer team, is still in Scotland, whereas the town is now in England. So coming from Berwick-upon-Tweed, as you can imagine, Martin has got dialogue in his blood. He's had to have dialogue in his blood to get through life. So I'm going to hand over to Martin. He's going to talk about wait time and how we can use wait time to improve the quality of thinking and questioning with our students. He'll talk about the way in which dialogue isn't just conversation. It's about taking students in a particular direction, and that direction is to develop reasoning, collaboration, and good habits of thinking. And he's also going to talk about the different types of dialogue and focusing on exploratory talk and how that can be the most powerful to help our students to go deeper. It fits very well with the learning challenge. It fits very well with mindset. It fits very well with questioning and feedback, all of which we've been writing about recently, and delighted to work with Corwin on those. I'm going to be here as well, and any questions that you send our way, and Martin and I will do our very best to answer them at the end of the presentation. But over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you all for tuning in to the webinar. Tonight, we're going to focus in on the idea of dialogue and how that might look in the classroom. For us, when we were putting the book together, a driving question for us was, how can we help students to understand the world that they live in and prepare them for independent, lifelong learning? And when we think about the idea of independence, it often seems a contradiction to say that collaboration and dialogue makes us more independent. But it comes as a way of thinking around what independence means. It's to look at the opposite to dependence. So we're not making students dependent on us or on adults to help them with their learning, but to help them to be able to think more for themselves, to be resilient to challenge, and to help them become better learners for life, whether that's through school or into university or into the workplace. So we're going to focus in tonight on 3 key areas. We're going to look at dialogue and how that helps us with learning. We're going to think about language and how dialogue can help to develop a language of learning and a language for learning. And we're going to look at the part that reflection plays in that.
Sorry, folks, we're having a bit of a problem with moving to the next slide at the moment. We're having a bit of a dialogue about it just now. We've ended up with an annotation going on. Jeff, I wonder whether you can help us with this one. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I'm here. So, do you want to maybe
a pop-up came to ask us to annotate, and it's now we're not getting any movement.
Okay, let me. It seemed to move now. I think you're off. There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Technology works better if we keep James away from it, I think. That's what we've just learned. So, picking up on the idea of developing dialogue and language for learning, giving students opportunities to reflect on their thinking and their learning. And recently, a friend was talking to me about the way that elephants are trained, one of those fascinating conversations that draws you in. And what he said was that elephants, from the time that they're small, have a rope tied around their leg, which is attached to a post in the ground, so that the elephant can walk, but when the rope stretches, the elephant feels a tug on its leg. It can't go any further, so it stops, gives up, and goes back again. As the elephant grows, eventually becoming an adult, it has a chain attached to its leg. It can still walk, it can get to the end of the chain, but when the chain stretches, it feels that tug on its leg, and it stops, goes back, and gives up. And when we thought about that, we thought, well, when an elephant is an adult size, an elephant could easily snap that chain. It could just push its leg, pull the chain out of the ground, pull the post out of the ground, and escape. But it doesn't, because it spent its lifetime learning that when you feel that tug on your leg, you give up, stop, and go back. And we thought that's an interesting metaphor for learning. When you look at a lot of our students, they don't feel a tug on their leg, but they feel that tug in the brain when there's a challenge, when there's struggle, when there's something difficult. They feel that tug in the brain, and they stop, give up, and go back to something that's more comfortable. We all do that ourselves as well, even as adults. We all tell ourselves, oh, I can't draw, I can't sing, I've always been terrible at maths. We have these chains in our brain, like the elephant around its leg. We can get so far, but when we feel that tug, we stop, give up, and go back. And if we really want to encourage our students to be able to take risks, to become more confident, to be more resilient to challenge, then we have to encourage them to take risks. Not physical risks, but risks in learning. Not just to come up with one safe idea and say the first response and not go beyond that. But when they struggle, when they challenge, to be able to find a way around it, so they can try and work out strategies that would help them to learn, so they feel like taking a risk can be rewarding and worthwhile. But for a lot of students, our teaching can sometimes get in the way of doing that. And this was a question that I was asked many years ago now when I first started teaching. I had a mentor, or more of a tormentor he was really, called Jim. And Jim observed me teaching a lesson. And at the end of the lesson, he said, how much did your teaching get in the way of their learning? It took me a long time to work out what he meant. I talked to him about it afterwards and said, Jim, I really don't understand what you're getting at. How can my teaching get in the way of their learning? And he pointed out something that happened in the classroom. Two boys were struggling away with a maths problem at the front. They'd found it hard. They'd started talking to each other. They were trying to work things out. They were getting more animated and more puzzled and seemed to, from where I was standing, to be more stuck with what they were doing. So being a good teacher, I went across to try and help them. And what I did when I got there was to look at what they were working on, what they were puzzled by. And I said, well, if you just do this, boys, and do this, there you are. You've got the answer. They had big smiles on their faces. I'd helped them in the short term and I'd got them to the answer. But it was only when I thought about what Jim said, how much did my teaching get in the way of them learning, that I realized what I'd done. They were trying to work things out. They were struggling away with something. They were thinking. They'd got into a dialogue to try and help each other to work things through. But I came along and I stopped them from doing all of that. I stopped them from thinking. I stopped them from trying to work it out. And I gave them the answer. I smoothed the way for them. And actually what I'd really taught them long term was that when you're struggling, when something's hard, stop, give up, go back, put your hand up, and the teacher will do it for you. I hadn't really encouraged them to take risks. What I'd really tried to show them was that what matters here is the answer, getting the right answer. And I pushed them to the right answer. I didn't help them with their learning strategies. I didn't help them become more confident, to be more resilient to challenge. I didn't encourage them to think about how they'd learned. I just made it easy for them. Mary Budd Rowe did some research in 1972 that's been repeated pretty much every year since around the world. She looked at how often we lead children to answers. One of the things she focused on was the amount of wait time between us asking a question and then taking a response from the child, or more commonly, actually just to continue talking. The average wait time between us asking a question and then either taking an answer from another child or continuing to talk is 0.8 seconds, less than 1 second. When the answers are really important to us, when the answers are what we've got in our mind, then we make that the goal of our classrooms. We ask on average around 400 questions a day as teachers, but we already know the answer to around 90% of those. And when we really think about the importance of answers, we ask questions that encourage students to just give us the right answer. So we don't give them a great deal of thinking time. And if you think about that as a metaphor, take Usain Bolt can run the 100 meters in under 10 seconds. In that 1 second, think about how much distance he's covered. If he ran through your classroom for that 1 second, that's how much thinking time our children have to come up with an answer. It's not a lot. And because we emphasize that right answer and we don't give much thinking time, Mary Budd Rowe also looked at how much time students have to talk when they're answering a question. Now, given that they've only had 0.8 seconds of thinking time, it's perhaps not surprising to learn that students don't talk very long when they give an answer either. And if you think about that, we could ask a question like, what's the capital of England? And if a student puts their hand up and says London, it doesn't take them very long to say London. They don't talk for very long. And I suppose a big question in that then is, who is it that's practicing all the talk in the classroom? Who's developing language? Who's developing a language for learning? And we'd have to say the person who's practicing most of the talking in the classroom is the teacher. When actually we should be encouraging the children to do the talking. That 0.8 seconds, which sounds remarkably short, but partly happens because sometimes students interrupt us. We don't even get all the way through a question before a student shouts out the answer. Or sometimes we start asking a question. What was the capital of? Nobody knows. No, okay, right. And we just move on to the next answer. So we've got no plan for how we use questioning to bring in the students' dialogue. And if we really want to encourage them to learn, if we want to encourage them to talk, it's not just about providing more time. It's about changing the way we think about dialogue and questioning. The typical sequence in most classrooms for questioning is that kind of question we've just asked. We initiate by asking a question. What's the capital of England? We get a response from the child. It's London. And then we evaluate. We say, well done, that's right. Or if they say the wrong answer, we say, no, that's wrong. Anyone else? And we repeat the pattern. We have that pattern because in our head, we have the answer that we want the children to get. It's a bit of a game. Guess what's in my head? We ask a question, the child responds, and we evaluate. Well done, that's right, or that's wrong. So perhaps if we want to encourage the students to develop language, if we want to give them time to talk, we need to change that last E from evaluate to explore. And that's about changing the way we think, how we respond to children's responses. So if we ask a question, rather than just responding with a well done and emphasizing the importance of getting the right answer, instead, perhaps we can try and work out a way to develop the exploring, develop their talk, develop their dialogue. Here's an example. If I asked you to work this out, 86 times 12 plus 17. Now, if we take that first one, initiate, respond, evaluate, you'll think that I'll be looking for you to give me an answer right now. But don't worry, I'm not going to. What I would be looking for from the children, if I'm exploring instead of evaluating, is to ask, how will you work that out? I don't need to know what the answer is yet, but how are you going to work that out? What will you do? Now, if I ask that of the children, rather than focusing in on can they get the right answer or not and get it as quickly as possible, I'm focusing in on the process. How will you work that out? When I then get answers from the children about how they'll work it out, we can share differences. There'll be many different ways of answering this question, and the children will have many different ways of trying to break it down too. So if I get an answer from one child who says, well, I'm going to do 80 times 12, then 6 times 12 and add them together, we can talk about one process. But then ask another child, 86 times 10, 86 times 2, and add them together. We're now comparing the way that we're learning. The focus now has become on how rather than what. So in terms of our dialogue sequence, we're looking at asking a question, taking a response from the child, and then looking to try and explore. So it's not really about the initial question that we ask. Actually, what's far more important in terms of dialogue is how we react to the response we get from the children. Mary Budd Rowe found that if we try and wait, if we try and give a little bit of time for students to think, then it helps to improve their answers. If we ask a question and wait just 3 seconds, then the length of explanations that you get back from advantaged groups of students increased 5-fold, and amongst more disadvantaged groups, 7-fold. So we're talking about getting much more back from the children when we just give them 3 seconds to think of an answer. We get more children volunteering their answers. We get more failures to respond and I don't knows decreases from 30% to less than 5%. Children start to ask more questions. And because they've had that time to think, time to work out how and to process, scores tended to increase as well on academic achievement tests. And this comes down to not really just waiting, but actually actively making time for students to process. It means changing our mindset as teachers when we ask a question, not to getting the right answer, but to giving students opportunity to think, to work things out, and to process information. That 3 seconds doesn't sound like a great deal, but it can be in the classroom a very long time of waiting. If we take 3 seconds now of wait time, if I asked you a question, what's the capital of England, and waited 3 seconds, it can feel like a very long silence. Tumbleweed blows through the room. And the same can happen in the classroom. It feels like a very long time to wait. But actually, if we give children that space, give them that time to think and to process, they're more likely to use that time to think about the answer that they want to give, think of possibilities, perhaps even to realise what they don't know and ask more questions. That idea of creating wait time encourages us to give students space to think and then to talk. They don't have to be talking back to the teachers. Dialogue doesn't always happen between teacher and student. It should also happen between students. And when we change our mindset about that, we create conditions for excellent dialogue. That means changing the way we think about talk in the classroom. Hopefully, students will have more meaningful discussions because what they're looking for are solutions to problems. They're looking for the process and ways of learning. They're using judgment to try and answer questions and work together. By working together, we create a community in the classroom where we think together, work on questions together, so that we can get to better understandings. But it also needs us to use that mindset to be challenging and supportive, to find a balance, to show that we believe in the students as thinkers and learners. It's important that we believe in them as much as them believe in us and our knowledge. What are they capable of when they do the thinking? Encouraging students to share their perspectives and to learn from each other and to put their ideas into their own words and share with each other helps them to become more capable thinkers, able to learn, willing to learn, able to reason, and able to express their views more clearly and more confidently. We're hoping to encourage our students to be better thinkers by becoming better talkers. When they take that time to think and turn it into their language, it gives us that opportunity to help them become better, lifelong, independent learners. But it's not enough just to have conversation. It's not just talking for the sake of talking. When we're talking about dialogue, we mean something specific. Dialogue is about learning. It should have a focus. It should be taking us somewhere. Conversation is social. It's cumulative. It builds up a sense of trust and harmony in our group. But it's not necessarily about learning. Dialogue takes the best of conversation. It takes that sociability. It takes that sense of well-being, but it pushes it to be about learning. It's supporting challenge. It's forming judgments. It's creating reasons. It's challenging assumptions. Dialogue is socially constructed learning. I'm going to give you an activity to try. I'm going to give you a dialogue task, even though we're all spread out across the world to try. Have a look at these 3 images. I'm going to ask you, which one do you think is the odd one out? You can use your paneling to select A for the tiger, B for the hippo, or C for the duck. Which one do you think is the odd one out? As you click in your choices there, we'll get a poll that will tell us which one you think is different to the others. And we'll find out what your votes were for. As the results of the poll come in, Jeff will collect those together for us. What I'd like you to think about now is why you picked that one as the odd one out. And we can use the chat function for this to try and give some reasons. So this is like using dialogue, only we're using the technology world of dialogue. So think about your reasons for the odd one out. We've got the majority of people there, 43 have gone for the duck, but perhaps you chose the tiger, perhaps you chose the hippo. Thinking about one of your answers, if you're one of the no answers, then go with the duck. See if you can put in a reason into the chat function. Why was that one the odd one out? We've got 2 legs rather than 4. The duck's the odd one out. It stands on 2 legs. The duck is a bird, and 2 are mammals. One's not a mammal. The duck's not a mammal. 2 legs, webbed feet, a bill. The duck's not like a bill. I'm looking at there's a little friend in the background of the duck there. Or 2 friends. I can see another shoe in the background as well. The tiger's not herbivores. Tigers are predators. We've got feathers, webbed feet, predator or carnivores. I'm wondering if anybody's made the hippo the odd one out for any reason. Perhaps that's a slightly tougher one. Less people chose the hippo. And size as well. The hippo isn't orange. The other 2 are more of an orange colour. Thank you, Martina, for the hippo isn't orange. Thank you very much. We've got lots of very good reasons in there for all those different ones. And what's interesting is that you didn't all choose the same odd one out. We actually have quite a few different ones there. One I could keep in my living room. Which one? I'm not sure which one. The hippo, perhaps. And I'm guessing that one's going to be the duck. And water is part of a habitat. The hippo has no design. The hippo and duck both live in water. So, thank you. If we were doing this with children, what we would do is try and collect some of these ideas together. And we might collect those onto a whiteboard or to a flip chart paper. And what we would have is, if we were talking in our lesson about the difference perhaps between birds and mammals, we might use the children's words to help us to decide which of these characteristics go with birds and which ones go with mammals. So we're actually using the children's words, we're using the children's language to help us to create the characteristics of our learning. In this case, it would be about birds and mammals. And we've got lots of ideas there. We've got webbed feet. Is that with birds or mammals? You might find some things go with both. If they go with both, what do we do with that? Is it a bird or mammal? And we can start using that Venn diagram thinking to help them to understand the similarities and differences between birds and mammals. If we'd been able to collect those in on that flip chart, the difference in thinking there is around what the children have created. The language didn't come from the teacher. In this instance, the language came from the children and was used in their learning. Here's an example from an art lesson that I watched a teacher do recently. She'd been on a course with us at Challenging Learning, and she'd seen the odd one out activity and rather liked it for an art lesson. She does a still life project where she gets the students to paint a still life painting. And what she'd normally done is she gave the students the items that they had to draw. She gave them the instructions. So they all ended up with pretty much the same picture at the end. She said, I'm going to do it differently. And she showed these 3 pictures to the students and asked them which is the odd one out. As they gave answers, she wrote them up on a flip chart. So she said, one's got a dark background. The rest have got light. One's only got 1 item in it. The rest have got more. One looks realistic, like a photograph. The others look painted. You can see the brush marks in this one, but not in this one. She then showed them another 3 pictures, and they added more to their list of words. It's abstract. It's got fluorescent colours in it. That one's modern. Those are all. She showed them another 3 and added a few more words to the list. It took about 5 or 6 minutes at the start of the lesson to get a list of ideas up on the flip chart. After she'd got the words from the students, she said, you're going to design your own still life paintings now. I'd like you to pick 3 words from the flip chart that would help you to design a really good still life. And the students picked their 3 words, and then they went off and made their designs and started working on their paintings. Throughout the painting project, she kept coming back to their words. So she said, you said you were going to have a dark background on here, but actually you've got a light background. Why did you do that? So the students had to explain, oh, well, I had quite a dark item, so to make it stand out from the background, I changed my background to a light background so you could see the item. So they were reasoning through the choices they made in the lesson. But she began the lesson with their words, with their language, and then let them build their reasoning and their thinking and their decisions around their words. It's a really simple activity, but it was really effective in encouraging the students to think for themselves. But it took that dialogue, and it took that type of thinking. In her question, which is the odd one out, she didn't have one answer she was looking for. She was looking for many answers. Just like we did with the birds and mammals, we had lots of different reasons and lots of different choices for which was the odd one out and why. It's inclusive. It brings everybody's idea in, and it starts from where the children are and with the language that they have. What makes that type of session most effective is that it's based on these 6 themes. If you look at any research from around the world from the last 80 years or so, you'll find the same themes keep cropping up the world over in what makes good learning. The most effective learning, the best sessions that we see around the world are active, meaningful, challenging, collaborative, mediated, and reflective. What I mean by that is active, so the students can explore their own ideas. Not active as in they're running around the classroom, but active as in they're not passive. They're not just listening. They're getting the opportunity to take part, to process, and to think. It's meaningful. It's at their level, so the students can engage with it and make connections with their current learning. It's challenging. The students should think, make decisions, justify, give reasons. It's collaborative, so the students work together and share ideas with each other. It's mediated. This is to do with the teacher's role. The teacher guides, prompts, questions, rather than just telling them the answer. And it's reflective, so the students have time to think about their own learning. Now, if we think about the odd one out activity that we've just done, did it manage to do any or all of those 6 things? And if you have a look down through that list and think about what you just did in the odd one out, did you have to explore your own thinking? Did you connect to it? Did it make you think? Did we share ideas? What was my role? Was it to give you the answer or just to ask you the questions? And reflective. That's an interesting one. Reflective, even on this list, it often comes at the end. We think of it as looking back on our learning. But in fact, we reflect all the time. So if you think about the odd one out, as soon as you hear an idea from somebody else, it makes you think, oh, I haven't thought of that, or that's a different one to what I was expecting, or no, I'd never have gone there, that's done. And it makes you rethink your own ideas. So we reflect all the time. It doesn't just come at the end and look back on. In fact, a lot of dialogue is about reflecting. It's reflecting on what I understand, comparing it with somebody else, and hopefully learning from that interaction. But reflection is not something that we get much time for. Where we are at the moment, it's 5 past midnight here, so it's about time for a bedtime story, I think. This is from Winnie the Pooh. Bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear coming down the stairs now on the back of his head. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And I really like that. That makes me think of what learning is like for students. How much do our students bump, bump, bump through the day? Bump, bump, bump through knowledge, new facts and information, tasks and activities. And at the end of a session, when they walk out of the classroom, how much time have they had to stop bumping and think, what have I learned today? What did I really gain from that? What did I understand? If we can find time throughout our lessons to stop bumping and give students the time to reflect on their learning, how far have I come and what next? Then hopefully we can help them to process that information even better. Dialogue is key to helping them reflect on learning and help them to understand. It's crucial to stop them from bumping, because once they get to the end of the day and their brain's full, it all falls out again when they go out of the door. What I'm going to ask you to think about now is just to take some time to stop bumping from your busy day and to reflect on your learning. What do you want for your students? Again, you could put some answers into the chat box. How would you finish this sentence? When a student leaves my school, so after they've been through your primary school or your secondary school, think about your context. When a student has been through all that learning and they finish at school, I would like them to be what? How would you finish that sentence? Take a moment to think. You could even write something into the chat function. Successful, thank you, Holly. Confident, thank you, Sarah. Critical thinkers, lifelong learners, energized, excited, prepared, happy. Feeling confident in skills, getting the job done, being capable, problem solvers, curious and thoughtful. To be critical thinkers, to be able to solve problems on their own, to be seekers of the why, confident in what they know and do. To be self-sufficient. I've put on the screen some common responses that we get when we ask schools or groups of teachers this. None of them as exciting as yours. Seekers of the why. We've got a few there that were similar, perhaps. To be confident, to be well-rounded, to be literate and numerate, to be able to solve problems, to be full of potential, self-aware. As somebody once said, I'd like them to be grateful and buy me gifts. Hopefully we've gone a little bit deeper than that. If these are the things that we want for our students, if we want them to be open-minded, if we want them to be critical, to be reflective, if we want them to be full of hope, keen to go on and learn for the rest of their life, then how much are we explicitly and deliberately helping them to become those things? That language on the screen, the language that you put into those chat boxes, how much is that a shared language with the children? Do the children know how to be more independent, more confident, more resilient? What does it mean to be curious? What does it mean to be a problem solver? And we often really want these things for our students, and we hope that we're developing them with them. But if we go back to what we said at the start about focusing in on the answers that we get, how much do our students feel that school is really just about learning the facts, knowing the information? How much are they aware that they're becoming full of potential, more sociable, more interested, engaged, skilled, ready for more learning? And that's about developing a shared language with the students. It's language that gives us access to learning. It gives us access to the curriculum. Without language, we can't access new learning. The limits of my language means the limits of my world. I can only go as far as what I can express. So if we really want to help our students to become all of those things that we had in the chat box and that we had on that last slide, then we need to create classroom environments that give students the opportunity to talk, and to talk for learning. And that means being deliberate about the types of talk that we use in the classroom. There's 3 types of talk that you might expect to hear in a classroom: cumulative, disputational, and exploratory. Of those, 2 are very natural. Cumulative and disputational talk are very natural. We hear it quite a lot. It's very common. They're things that we fall into without really thinking. But exploratory talk is quite deliberate. Exploratory talk is dialogue that helps us learn. To become good at exploratory talk, we have to practice it. We need tuition to help us to become more exploratory in our dialogues. I'll talk a little bit about what each of these means. Cumulative talk is very positive. It's also uncritical. It gives us a bit of a sense of harmony. Conversation fits very well into cumulative talk. It's characterized by people repeating things that others have said and confirming it, or just elaborating on what we said. If we've been to a sports game, it's the people who come out and say, oh, we were great today. Yes, we were fantastic. Yeah, we deserved to win. Oh, didn't we? Yes, he was a great player. Yes, he did a great job. We add to the feeling of common knowledge and harmony together. Cumulative is building on what we heard the last person to say. So it makes us feel good. We use that kind of talk a lot with people we're not familiar with, people we don't know as well. It helps us to feel safe with each other. Disputational talk is almost the opposite. It's negative. It's critical. It's actually critical of other people and their ideas. The focus of this kind of talk is on winning. It's making sure that my argument is better than yours. The team don't pool their resources. And if somebody makes a mistake, they are criticized for it. So these are often very short exchanges with lots of assertions made. There are challenges, but it's a challenge of the person, and lots of counter assertions are made. So it's saying, that wasn't a foul. Yes, it was. He was pulling his shirt off. No, he dived. People don't fall over like that. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. I don't believe, and so on. So we get into argument. Sometimes we create, when we're having talk in the classroom, we create debates. Debates are very much disputational talk. The focus is on winning. It's on outdoing the other people. When we come back to that idea of learning, disputational talk doesn't often have a learning focus. Because what happens is we're so intent on the winning and presenting our argument that we don't really listen to the other side. So we dismiss alternative points of view and perceptions rather than learning from them or building on them. And that's where exploratory talk bridges the gap. Exploratory talk is critical but constructive. There is the expectation that there will be challenges, but those challenges are challenging ideas and opinions. Alternatives are offered and justified. So there's reasoning in the talk. The competition is between the idea rather than the people. So often these are much longer exchanges with use of questions for clarification. There's the opportunity to stop bumping and reflect, to explain thinking, or perhaps even to speculate and say, what if, what about? So that might be a conversation where we say, oh, our team was really good today. I thought we kept the ball really well. I thought we were, but what about just after half time when this happened? What about when that player made this choice? So questions are asked that might encourage us to think differently. Now, as you can probably tell from that already, exploratory talk is not very natural. It's not the sort of thing we do. If we go out with our friends for a meal and somebody says, I'm going to choose the pie tonight, we don't often question their choice and say, why did you choose that one? Could you not have taken something different? Why would you want? It's not a natural way to talk. So exploratory talk has to be taught. It's something we learn together. And that means creating an environment in which students have the opportunity to have dialogue and to learn about the different types of dialogue that they can be using or that they sometimes get caught up in using. Cumulative talk, for example, and disputation, which we said were very natural, are often just a little bit too nice or a little bit too argumentative. And if you think about your class, think about the students you teach, what's the most common type of talk that you hear? Sometimes people think with children that it might be disputational, that they argue a lot. But actually the most common one is too nice. It's cumulative. Children just keep adding to each other's ideas, and they want to get on, they want to be sociable, they want to be accepted. So the talk is agreeing for the sake of agreeing, and that means sometimes mistakes aren't picked up, challenges aren't made, students don't learn to ask questions of each other. That's what exploratory talk does. It has a focus on learning. So we need to create the right kind of dialogue environment for that learning to take place. when we can encourage students to be more exploratory, to be able to question each other, to be able to think more deeply, offer reasons and counter reasons, then we start to work towards some of these things that we mentioned in our chat earlier. Exploratory talk can support students becoming more ready for learning, becoming less dependent, more independent. It helps to grow confidence. And a big part of that is through that use of language. Rupert Wegerif created a program actually looking at the teaching of talk through computing. And he looked at the teaching of explicitly teaching exploratory talk. He set up a problem-solving activity with 3 groups of students, and he just monitored the number of questions that the students asked each other. He also looked for how many reasons they gave, so he looked out for words like because or cause, and he also looked out for speculation. What if? So when the students say, if we try this, maybe we could do that. 17 questions, 40 reasons given, and only 2 what-ifs. In total, the groups used 3,484 words. They spent 5 weeks then working on exploratory talk. So the students were given opportunities to practice dialogue, try activities like the odd one out, to use their language for 5 weeks. And at the end of the 5 weeks, Wegerif and Scrimshaw gave another problem-solving task for the students. And what they found was that the number of questions asked by the group had risen, leading to a change in language that the groups used. Every individual within the group improved their own performance, so that they found 86 questions, 97 reasons given, and 35 ifs. The total number of words used by the group had gone up from 3,480 to 5,761. And what they noticed was that the groups were talking differently. That language was different in those collaborative activities. But it wasn't just that the group were getting better. It's that every individual within the group got better. And if you look at those test scores that were given at the end, the group, before they worked on exploratory talk, scored 52 in total for their test. Afterwards, they scored 67 on individual academic achievement tests, showing that every individual improved as a result of thinking together. And it was that link between dialogue and cognition, dialogue and talk. But as Wegerif and Scrimshaw found out, actually, although exploratory talk is so powerful in changing the way we learn, observational research suggested that very little of it happens by itself when students work together in groups. Most of the talk is cumulative. So if we really want to encourage our students to learn better, to become more independent as thinkers, to develop that level of cognition, perhaps we need to help create environments in which exploratory talk is fundamental. In the Challenging Learning Through Dialogue book that James introduced at the start of the webinar, we create a lot of tools, odd one out you've tried, but we have opinion corners activities, encouraging the students to agree or disagree, or say how strongly they agree and disagree with an opinion. Fortune lines encourage students to think about change over time and match reasons and justification to that change. Venn diagrams we talked about just after the odd one out there, looking at how we sort and classify information. A mystery activity is a bit like being a detective, using clues to piece together what's happened and justify our thinking afterwards. The Challenging Learning Through Dialogue book is really there to encourage that environment where talk is the norm. Students exploring their own thinking, sharing their perceptions, sharing their reasons, and improving their cognitive levels. When we do those things, it creates conditions for dialogue. And as we said at the start, it's encouraging students to think of solutions to problems, to look at the process of learning rather than just the answer and the end result. It's creating a community of thinkers together who work with each other to come up to the best understandings. And that requires us to believe in our students, to believe that they can learn through talk, that they can express their opinions, that they can become better thinkers and more independent learners. So our dialogue should be challenging and supportive. And that means making our learning active, meaningful, challenging, collaborative, mediated, and reflective. Thank you very much for coming along and listening to the webinar this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. The 3 books that are on your screen at the minute, The Learning Challenge, Challenging Learning Through Dialogue, and Challenging Learning Through Feedback, are all based on that idea of interactive learning in the classroom and give lots of practical tips as well as some of the theory we've shared tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Sarah.
I have a couple of questions that have come in.
Sure.
First question, I teach second language learners, and some of these students have a limited vocabulary. Will this work with those students? How can I support and encourage their dialogue?
Yeah, a lot depends on the specific examples, and I get asked this quite a lot actually by people in different settings who work with students from immigrant students or students who've come into the country from outside. And actually it just puts the focus back on that key point we made at the start, which is to give the students as much of an opportunity to talk as they can. So rather than it being about the teacher leading the learning and leading the process, throw as much as we can to the students to learn and to develop. And actually encouraging those homeschool links as well, that actually the parents at home can be following up with the same kind of interactive thinking. Odd One Out, for example, can easily be used at home around the dinner table. It can be used as a game when you're in the car as you go. So encouraging parents to do the same and support the child's learning at home, so that that becomes then an expectation of a language for learning, rather than just being about the words to learn for the second language as it would be for those students.
There's also something about the words and the language that other students are using. So if they are in a mixed group and there are students with limited language, then rather than listening to the teacher all the time, but then listening to other students who might have more developed language than they have, but certainly less developed language than the teacher. And so often it's more accessible to them to listen to other students as well. So it's taking part in dialogue doesn't necessarily mean you're talking. Taking part in dialogue, of course, is a big part of it is listening, processing, understanding, making connections, trying to work out what other people, their meaning and so on. So it's very much about sharing that learning of language together.
And I think, as Hope has mentioned in there, but early learning or students as English as a second language, for example, then sentence starters is a good way of providing that scaffolding and structure, and as James says, giving them that opportunity to learn from each other as well.
I have one more question. What's the best first step to beginning the process to have this kind of dialogue in the classroom? What is the best first step to take?
There's a couple of different ways to answer that one. One is to look at the simple way. A simple way is to do something like an odd one out. It's a very easy way to start accessing student language, and it starts to change the expectation in the classroom of the student that when they give an answer and you put it up, and somebody else gives an answer and you put that up too, that they realise how much you value their perspectives and their choices. So that's a really simple way in, just to use an activity like that one. In a slightly deeper way to do that, we looked at the 3 types of talk. A good way to encourage talk in the classroom is to create a set of agreed ground rules for talk, so that it sets the expectation in the classroom, not rules for behaviour like you might have in the classroom, but how we will be together when we talk. So when the students are having a dialogue, there might be ground rules in there like, when somebody says something, I will answer with, I agree with that because. Or you might have ground rules like, if we make a mistake, we don't criticise, or we encourage everyone to speak. You can have ground rules that set the tone for talk in the classroom. the key then is, once you've got the ground rules, is to give the students as many opportunities to talk as you can so they can live out those ground rules.
Terrific. I have one last question. Can you talk a little bit more about the fortune lines activity that you showed?
Yeah, sure. Fortune lines is you take statements, the cards that might follow a plot or a story, and then you follow that character in the story, and you follow their fortunes, really, and you plot that on the graph. So if you took the story of Little Red Riding Hood, for example, we can all picture that story. If you plotted the graph against her emotional state during the story, how happy she was through the story, you can picture that graph. And then you map the story against the graph. Where would we place this event on the graph? So the students start reasoning through and talking about some of the feelings associated with that graph. You can follow a case study, or you could follow a character in a story. Macbeth, for example, what's his state of mind throughout the story of Macbeth? And you can plot a graph and use evidence from the text to support your reasons.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our questions.
Thank you.
I think we are going to turn it over to Margaret to talk about the information on the screen right now.
Thank you, Jeff. Just a reminder, if you are interested in learning more, you can save 20% using the discount code on the screen on the 3 books in the Learning Challenge series. James and Martin are also available for consulting to visit your school or district. And we will be sending a follow-up email in a few days with a recording of this webinar, the presentation slides, and the discount code. Thank you all once again for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar with James Notthingham and Martin Renton.